In order to learn about our origins, we have to go back in time. In order to go back in time, we have to learn about time travel. Today, we will be discussing top secret time gate technology, how it relates to current events, and how it's intricately related to Christianity and the reincarnation cycle. What I will be uncovering in this video might shock some of you and shatter some deeply held worldviews. But I assure you, if you stick with me to the end of this presentation, certain mysteries and historical puzzles will start to make sense. Are you ready for the first shock? Here it is. World War II caused World War I. World War II caused World War I. How? For thousands of years, there has existed a top secret group of time travelers who have shaped the history and destiny of mankind in unimaginable ways. Some of you have heard of the enigmatic Count Saint-Germain, an adventurer and alchemist who hung out with Mozart and Voltaire. Towards the bottom of this article, it states, Saint-Germain is said to have made far-fetched claims, such as being 500 years old, leading to Voltaire to dub him the Wonder Man, and that he is a man who does not die, and who knows everything. Did he know everything, Voltaire? Or was he from a future time where he read about you in a history book? Perhaps more of you have heard of Nicolas Flamel, a French alchemist said to have succeeded in creating a philosopher's stone and achieving immortality. What really caught my attention was his wife Pernelle, who, towards the bottom here, brought the wealth of 2 previous husbands to the marriage. I found that rather curious. Divorce wasn't allowed in medieval Catholic Europe, and you certainly couldn't remarry without being excommunicated. I mean, this was well before Henry VIII's time. So what, was Pernelle just a lucky widow? Besides her word for it, there really are no records detailing exactly how this alchemist couple acquired their wealth. But I think I know how. In 1901, a series of mysterious metal objects, including a large gear, were found off the coast of a Greek island. Archaeologists determined that this so-called Antikythera mechanism was an ancient, highly advanced clock that could predict astronomical events, such as eclipses, decades in advance. When they cleaned up the artifacts and reassembled the fragments, they rebuilt a model showcasing its intricate design and complexity, with several layers of shifting gears and odd inscriptions. We'll come back to Greece in a bit. Turkey is another site for a very famous astronomical observatory, Göbekli Tepe, dated to 11,000 years ago. Many of the carvings and artifacts on the pillars were clearly constellations and zodiac signs. But why were the ancients so preoccupied with keeping track of the stars? Was it simply for agricultural reasons? To know when to begin harvest season before winter? Was it simply because they were bored and had time to build these megastructures and chart the stars? I propose an even more clandestine reason for the ancients' near obsession and meticulous record-keeping of the motions of the stars. This is a depiction of the Babylonian Magi order, who would stand on top of their temples, take notes of the positions of the planets and stars, and then descend down secret passageways not open to the general public, and go deep, deep underground, where they would manage not stargates, which I personally haven't found evidence for, but time gates. Time gates, where they would welcome 1 or 2 time travelers from the future, who would spill the tea on historical events. That way, these secret societies could always stay a step ahead of the game. In fact, many of the prophets of the Bible were actually time travelers. I told you guys in my last video that the Bible is full of code. In this video, we're going to explore why and dive in deeper than ever before. Speaking of ancient Babylon, Nimrod was considered the first Freemason, according to legend. Do you know that among Freemasons, one of the ways they can determine if a man they meet is a fellow brother is by asking him, "Are you a traveling man?" Brian Forrester is a Templar Knight on YouTube, and he revealed that besides the secret handshakes, one of the ways you can identify a brother is by asking him, "Are you a traveling man?" And if you were a Mason, you'd answer, "Yeah, I travel west to east and east to west." What Forrester didn't reveal, because he can't, is what that actually means. East is the direction of the rising sun, meaning you're from the future. West is the direction of the setting sun, and means you're going to the past. This is only known to high-level Masons involved in these top-secret underground projects. A regular Blue Lodge member knows nothing about this. Please see my previous videos about the different lodges. Another very important symbol in Freemasonry are tents and tent makers. Please remember this about the tent makers. This is going to come in handy in a few slides. Like Saint Germain and Nicholas Flamel, another enigmatic figure who seemed to have appeared and disappeared out of nowhere was Wallace Farad Muhammad, the founder of the Nation of Islam. He showed up on the 1930s Detroit scene just as mysteriously as he left, with an incessant goal of converting African Americans to Islam. But why? Where was he from? Or rather, when was he from? In his lectures, Wallace would often say strange things, that he was from the East, and that the time has not yet come for him to reveal more about himself. Needless to say, it wasn't long before Wallace got himself arrested. In the United States, pre-civil rights era, you do not mobilize African Americans for any reason without grabbing the attention of law enforcement. But the superiors of the police force ordered their men to stand down. They asked him a couple questions and eventually had to let him go. You see, Wallace was a time traveler from the East, or from the future. And the universal rule is you have to let a time traveler do whatever he was assigned to do, whatever mission he was sent back in time for. You absolutely must. Otherwise, Mandela effects are going to be the least of your problems. So why was his mission to convert African Americans to Islam? And who sent him? I have reason to believe it was Iran, and American intelligence suspects this too, which is one of the reasons the US has been at odds with Iran for decades. Wallace is going to go through the Iran time gate and go back in time to complete various missions. How do I know he was a time traveler? Besides the clues in his speeches, he also left breadcrumbs throughout his travels. After he mysteriously left the Nation of Islam, he traveled further into the past, where he went by several other obviously traceable aliases. You can pause it and read it, but I want you to focus on the Oregon wheel, the broken wagon wheel of Portland, Oregon. He was leaving a note for himself and others, a message in time, that the time wheel in Oregon was non-operational. Okay, something happened to it. Here is the newspaper clipping from the 1908 Morning Register. Again, he was leaving a coded message for himself and other quote-unquote traveling men that at this time, the Oregon time gate could not be used. So I've mentioned Iran, the US, Babylon, modern-day Iraq. Yes, the time gates are all over the world, underground. When I journeyed out of the body to get more intel on the time gates, I immediately got Project Hermes and was taken on my own incredible journey throughout time. Now, when I looked up Project Hermes, it was listed as a guided missile research and development program, a joint partnership between Caltech, General Electric, and the U.S. Army. But this is more than just a missile program. If you recall from the Christopher Nolan film Tenet, many of these nuclear facilities, government research buildings, and major airports have deep underground facilities that house the time gates. These time gates look like stargates, but they're not. They're time gates and can only take you back in time, not forward. These machines don't use dates because dates and calendars vary by culture and time period. The time gates use celestial mechanics, the orbits of the planets and stars, constellations, and the zodiac to take you where you need to go. This is why the ancient magi were stargazers. The time gates operate 360 days a year, using the last 5 days to recalibrate and make sure the machine is properly aligned with any shifts in proper motion. Up to 2 time travelers can come through once every 10 days, totaling 72 time travelers a year. Remember that number, 72. That'll be important in a bit. The Mesoamerican time gates of the Aztec and Inca work a little differently. They had a different calendar. We won't get deep into that today. But the time gates are these large rings, a portal through time. Let's step through one now and allow me to take you on a journey. Imagine you are a man, a Christian American man of the 1950s. Your name is Paul. You work for the government and you're also a Freemason. In order to be a Freemason, you must be an adult male of good moral character and you must profess belief in a god or a higher power. One day, your boss, who is also a Freemason, asks you, Paul, if you could go back in time to witness one event, what would it be? As a deeply Christian man, your answer is obvious. I want to see my Lord on the cross. I want to be there in the crowd, witness him die for my sins and resurrect on the 3rd day. Your boss nods and after a moment looks you directly in the eye and says, I think we can arrange that. After a year of training, clearance paperwork, and a crash course in Koine Greek, you find yourself in Turkey, deep underground, face to face with a time gate. You remember your briefing. You, Paul, are to travel back in time and witness the crucifixion. We don't know if it happened in 30 or 33 AD. Document what you experience and leave a coded message for us in a time capsule, a message that will stand the test of time. Your code name will be Hermes, after the Greek messenger god. Your partner is Joseph, codenamed Zeus. He knows his way around the Mediterranean and the Levant. You look at Joseph next to you, a younger gentleman who nods in acknowledgement. As a Christian, you're not entirely comfortable with using pagan code names, but the assurance of your brother Freemason gives you the confidence to stay on mission. You step through the time gate. You can't take anything with you. No watches, no papers, not even clothes. Nothing from the future that could mess up the timeline. You and your teammate emerge on the other side of the gate and are quickly greeted by robed individuals known as time gatekeepers, which you recall from your briefing. They give you the clothes of that time period and a bowl of fresh water to drink. The time gate's coordinates were set to 29 AD, giving you, Hermes, and Zeus enough time to get acclimated to this new, or rather old, environment before the crucifixion. You travel to Golgotha with money and provisions provided by the timekeepers and settle in. However, 30 AD comes and goes with no crucifixion of Jesus. Ah, Hermes turns to his younger partner, Zeus. It must have indeed been 33 AD then. This gives us more time to settle in and even potentially look for him, witness our Lord's ministry before his death. But they were having a hard time finding him. The locals didn't seem to know what they were talking about. Year 33 rolls around, and Hermes and Zeus witness every single Roman execution. None of them were Jesus. There must have been a calendar error, Zeus chips in. Year 0 must have been different for them than what it is for us. We'll wait a few more years. But over a decade passes. Not only was there no crucifixion, no one has the slightest knowledge of any Jesus or his ministry. Hermes and Zeus decide to travel back up to Turkey and go underground, back to the time travelers' headquarters. Where is Jesus? Hermes sternly asks, the head of the timekeeping order. We've traveled up and down the Levant, Zeus pitches in. No one seems to know who Jesus even is, and we can't complete our mission without finding him. The timekeeper looks at both men patiently, but slightly confused. I'm sorry, gentlemen, but I've never heard of such a man either. Of course you have, Hermes almost yells. Jesus, the Christ, founder of Christianity, the #1 religion of the world. Again, I'm sorry, the timekeeper replied. Such a religion does not exist. There's Judaism, Buddhism, Greco-Roman traditions, mystery school religions. I've never heard of any Christianity. Hermes almost fell to his knees. No. I didn't travel 1,900 years into the past with no way home just to find out my Lord isn't real. I refuse to accept that. Paul, the timekeeper calls him by his real name, placing a gentle hand on his shoulder. If this unknown religion is so prevalent in your time, then perhaps the reason you were sent back wasn't to witness it, but to start it. What do you mean? Zeus asks, almost threateningly. The timekeeper remains calm. I mean, start the ministry. That's what you were sent here to do. Paul and Joseph. You will need new code names. Go forth as Saul and Barnabas and fulfill your destinies. And so, after much heated debate, argument, anguish, and turmoil, the two time travelers decided that for the greater good, they would kickstart Christianity, because they couldn't imagine a future where it didn't exist. If there was no Christianity, how could Paul have made the decision to go back in time in the first place? And so, from the late 40s AD into the 50s, Saul and Barnabas, their Jewish code names, began writing the early letters to the temples. Though Barnabas was in turmoil, Saul, Paul, still believed they could find evidence of the real Jesus. But they needed help. They needed funds and support from the local temples. Today, biblical scholars mostly agree that the letters of Paul must have been composed before the Gospels. This was because neither Paul nor Barnabas had memorized Scripture. They focused on getting support from the temples. This got them in trouble, and they ended up imprisoned multiple times for preaching ludicrous ideas. This was breaking Barnabas, but Paul refused to give up. The entire Bible is a book of Freemasonic code, a set of instructions from the past back to the future. Acts 14:12 is where they got their code names from. The passage states, they decided that Barnabas was the Greek god Zeus, and that Paul, because he was the chief speaker, was Hermes. In Acts 15, we see that Barnabas has had enough. After the stress of another imprisonment, Paul and Barnabas had a falling out because Barnabas refused to keep lying to future generations that Christianity was real, when it was really a time-looped phenomenon. Time-looped phenomena occur when you become the cause of an effect observed in the future. Barnabas no longer wanted anything to do with this, but Paul's letters were sloppy and he wasn't fluent in the gospel. He needed help. And so, with the help of the timekeeping order, Paul sent out the call. Remembering his Freemasonic symbolism and his knowledge of the Hermes program, he realized that the scriptures themselves were the time capsule his boss instructed him to leave. His boss, who won't even be born for another 1900 years. Paul shook his head and refocused. If he leaves a coded message that lasts throughout time, surely there will be people, even if a few, who will read the Bible and decipher its hidden meanings, who will want to travel back in time, like he did, to aid the Lord's ministry. And sure enough, the call was answered. Throughout history, there have always been those who sought a deeper truth. Secret societies recruit these people for top secret projects. People who can decode and have an aha moment. People who are balanced enough to see and aren't on either extreme. Not the super religious who read the Bible at face value, or the anti-religious who totally discard the Bible as a complete waste of time. Those who are balanced can see the clues and answer the call. Acts 18:1-3 states, Then Paul left Athens and went to Corinth, major cities in southern Greek peninsula. There he became acquainted with a Jew named Aquila, born in Pontus, who had recently arrived from Italy with his wife Priscilla. They had been expelled from Italy as a result of Claudius Caesar's order to deport all Jews from Rome. Yeah, I don't know about that, but the names Aquila and Priscilla, like Zeus and Hermes, are Greco-Roman code names for their mission. How do I know that? Let's continue. Paul lived and worked with them, for they were tent makers, just as he was. I told you to remember the tent makers, that they'd be important. The author of Luke Acts, on behalf of Paul, is making a call out to fellow Masons and associated groups. I also said remember the number 72, the maximum amount of time travelers that can come through a gate in a year. Luke 10:1-4 states, The Lord now chose 72, some manuscripts read 70, other disciples and sent them on ahead in pairs to all the towns and villages he planned to visit. These were his instructions to them. The harvest is so great, but the workers are so few. Pray to the Lord who is in charge of the harvest and ask him to send out more workers for his fields. Go now, and remember that I am sending you out as lambs among wolves. Don't take along any money, or a traveler's bag, or even an extra pair of sandals, and don't stop to greet anyone along the road. Remember how I said you can't take anything with you? Just like in Terminator, you have to time travel nude and with no possessions that could distort the timeline. Luke 10:17 reads, "When the 72 disciples returned, they joyfully reported to him, 'Lord, even the demons obey us when we use your name.'" This will certainly come in handy later when we talk about Solomon's ring and the 72 demons he controlled. So the 70 or the 72 heeded the call, men and women throughout time, that traveled back to 1st century AD to help Paul, become Paul. These were people who memorized the Gospels and other New Testament books, recognizing that Paul was a tent maker, a Freemason, who would need help writing the New Testament. The 72 disciples came through time gates in underground Syria, Turkey, Italy, Greece, and other locations. How do I know that? This is a map of Greece. The Peloponnese Peninsula, highlighted in blue, is understood in secret time-traveling societies to represent a right hand, called the mani on the map, cognate with manos, the Spanish word for hands. Please see my 3 pyramids video on cognates. Take a close look at the extensions of the Peloponnese Peninsula. Where it says Corinth and Nafpleo is the thumb. Further down, where it says Elafonisi, is the index and middle finger together. The Laconicos Gulf is next to the ring finger, and the Messenia Gulf is next to the pinky. Deep underground, beneath the waves of these beautiful Greek island shores, exist time gates and facilities to house these machines, like the Antikythera mechanism we discussed at the beginning of the video. This geographical hand code was used to tell which time gate you came from. For example, I'm sure you've all seen old paintings of a prophet or saint mysteriously holding up 2 fingers. This was a secret sign for the future time traveler that he or she should go through the Elafonisi time gate, represented by the index and middle finger together. How about images like this? You guessed it. This is instructing future time travelers to go through the Laconicos gate. Also notice his hand placement, slightly below the chest. See the difference here, where a depiction of Christ shows him with the same hand sign, but now above his head. Christians typically interpret these hand signs as blessings, but no. These are codes, signs, and instructions, a message across time, in scripture and in art. Kept a secret to hide the biggest bombshell in history, that the religion of Christianity is a time-looped phenomenon. It only exists because time travelers went back in time to create it. They rationalized that this was necessary to give the West a unified saintly tradition based on Judaism, to act as a buffer against the rise of Islam. But even with a 600-year head start, Christianity and Islam are almost head-to-head, and decoding Wallace Farad as a time traveler indicates the Muslims are in on this too. Here is more religious art depicting hand signs, of which time gates they came from, a message to their future selves. Also, notice the position of their feet. In Freemasonry, foot placement is also used as a sign. If the hand, or mani, represents the Greek islands. Can you guess what country the foot represents? Of course, Italy. I saw this painting of John the Baptist, and I couldn't figure out at first why Da Vinci would depict him in such an awkward, uncomfortable position. Da Vinci was, of course, in the know, and I figured it out. See where his right knee meets his left leg? Where the calf muscle meets the lower leg? If you look closely at a map of Italy, that exact location is called Pescara, and I've told you guys in a previous video about the fissures of men. One hand points to the east, while the other hand points down, telling you where he came from and where he's going. So, wow, I told you guys that the entire Bible is a book of secret hidden code. It goes much deeper than numerology or gematria, much deeper than that. So how exactly does this work, and how does it relate to the reincarnation cycle and current events? We have to go back to the Essenes, a Jewish mystical order that on the surface appeared to live simple, pious lives devoted to religious study. But in reality, they were a secret time gatekeeping order. The men and women of the Essenes would gather in secret locations hidden from the public and descend down deep into the underground, deeper than what most people even knew exists, where they would manage the time gates and the visitors that would come through. Time gates, again, look like stargates, but they aren't. They function like a mini particle accelerator, opening a portal not through space, but through time, calibrated to the celestial mechanics and orbital motions of the planets and stars, so meticulously charted by the ancients for this very reason. Again, because you couldn't come through with anything from the future, not even clothing, the Essenes needed women on their team in case a female time traveler was to be welcomed. This was the case, too, for the White Lotus Society, who managed the Chinese time gates. They also welcomed women into their order at a time when this was very unusual. Now we know why. I'd like to reemphasize how important it is to not bring things through the gate. The Mesoamerican time travelers weren't so careful with this, as depicted here, with this Aztec or Mayan traveler carrying items from his time through the gate to the distant past, which is why archaeologists still have a hard time figuring out when the Mayan civilization actually started. The first time gates were said to have descended down from the heavens, given to humanity by the gods. I saw that it wasn't that simple. There was definitely a war. But again, like the Antikythera mechanism we discussed in the beginning, humans started to construct their own time gates using their own makeshift power supply units. In fact, I argue that the main reason why there was a sudden shift from the pre-pottery Neolithic age to this near explosion of the pottery age was mainly to provide power for these time gates. It wasn't just to hold cereals and grains, because there's verifiable evidence that pottery existed before agriculture, and I'll link that in the description. But these jars, hundreds, thousands of them, would be used as galvanic cells, a simple battery filled with an electrolyte fluid and a metal rod, an iron rod, and copper plates to create voltage. Hundreds of people would make pottery for the gods, but really it would go underground to help power the time gates. The Essenes would keep careful records not only of the stars, but of the time travelers, their usually Greco-Roman code names, and when they arrived. The time travelers were given the clothes of that time, shelter, money, and a briefing. The biblical time travelers all had to speak Koine Greek. You absolutely could not speak English, French, or whatever. You were there to aid Project Hermes with writing the New Testament. It wasn't too hard to spot time travelers, though. They were usually taller, well-groomed, clean-shaven, and overall healthier from a lifetime of brushing their teeth and eating modern food, as well as being immunized from most of the ancient plagues. So, the 72 time travelers, like Aquila and Priscilla, headed to Paul, and they were able to decode the Freemasonic symbolism of the Bible, heeded the call, and went back in time to help Paul finish his ministry. This was around 60 AD now. Again, they took these underground passages like this Templar tunnel in Israel, but as you go deeper still, the tunnels start looking like this. Even back then, thousands of years ago, the underground was far more advanced than the surface world. And the ancients knew this, which was why they desperately wanted to go down there, because they knew there would be medicine, a better life, and potentially freedom from the reincarnation cycle. So deeper still, I saw that there were these conference rooms where the time travelers would meet and plan what they were going to do. Let's just say I sat in to one of these meetings where Paul and the 72 disciples discussed who would write Matthew, who would write Mark, etc. Towards the end, a dispute breaks out. So, you too are from the year 2015? Yeah, we're from 2015. You mean 2015 years after the year of our Lord? He still hasn't returned? No, I guess not. Well, we're from the 1600s. We were quite sure that the Lord's return was imminent. Yeah, we're from the 700s, and the main reason we agreed to this was because we thought Jesus was coming back as well. Paul, at the head of the room, starts sweating. He hadn't told the other time travelers that he never actually saw Christ's crucifixion or met him at all. That's why Paul's story was so weird. He was apparently a Jew from Tarsus who studied under Jewish priests, but didn't seem well versed in Jewish customs. Yeah, no. Rabbis call him out all the time. They're just not buying it. And neither were some of the time travelers. A group of them left Paul and traveled further back in time. If Paul couldn't see the crucifixion, could they at least see the birth of their Lord and Savior? They were the biblical magi, the three kings from the east or from the future, who followed the stars to Bethlehem. Take a wild guess. Do you think they saw baby Jesus or not? When Paul's 72 disciples broke up, the remaining ones called more time travelers to not only help write the New Testament, but also to help make the Old Testament match the upcoming New Testament. The Septuaginta, or the Septuagint, the translation of the 70 or 72, is the bane of Jewish existence. It's notorious for changing the Hebrew word for young woman, Alma, into the Greek word for virgin, Parthenos, all in an attempt to create a seamless narrative from the Old to New Testament, which was why the Jews were really opposed to Paul and rejected his interpretation. They knew he was reaching for something. But even the Sanhedrin, the greater assembly of the 71 elders or judges, were time travelers sent all the way back to the Second Temple period to ensure that Judaism follows the monotheistic, Yahwist, Judeo-Christian path in preparation for the future. But again, there was pushback and rivalry. Jewish time travelers sent their own teams back in time to ensure the Davidic and Solomonic lines were as they should be. Solomon's ring was a time gate, and the 72 that helped the Jewish side were called demons in Christian lore. So what does this have to do with current events? When the Russian-Ukraine conflict started, Newsweek posted and then removed a photo of a Ukrainian soldier with a black sun symbol on her uniform. You can pause it and read it, but the black sun symbol means a few different things. But ultimately, it represents the time gates. Here is the symbol in Vivelsborg Castle, a famous SS gathering spot. Back in 2015, when they were dealing with the annexation of Crimea, the Azov battalion sported this symbol, the wolf's angle, which is actually another time travel symbol. It means going forward in time, then going through a portal back in time, then continuing forward again from an earlier time. Pretty much what we see in the political theater is just that, theater. I am in no way trivializing the suffering that people are going through. I'm just saying that the geopolitical chess game being played is more complicated than we realize. I've spoken previously about the hierarchy. Deep within the rock bed of the Black Sea is a crucial time gate. The people who rule underground Ukraine also have sway over Russia. However, underground Ukraine has a bit of a, let's call it a vampire problem or Nephilim problem. Whenever Ukraine has trouble controlling the Nephilim hordes and the integrity of the time gates is threatened, they call Russia to send in a special ops team to handle the problem and secure the time gates. In exchange, they got Crimea. Now, with the black hole closing in, and the only other option for the soulless is to download themselves into metaverse, there have been fierce battles over these time gates so that some people can escape to the past, to the good old days when there were no black holes and no metaverses. These time travelers will set up those advanced communities that archaeologists can't explain, that seem to have appeared out of nowhere ahead of their time, thousands of years ago. Yeah, but it's kind of hard to do that when the Nephilim are also battling for these limited time travel spots, because I saw that they went back in time and caused the Bronze Age collapse. Yeah. Another thing that Azov represents is the alchemical Azoth, described by Eliphas Levi in his book Transcendental Magic. The universal medicine is, for the soul, supreme reason and absolute justice. For the mind, it is mathematical and practical truth. For the body, it is the quintessence, which is a combination of gold and light. In the superior world, the first matter of the great work is enthusiasm and activity. In the intermediate world, it is intelligence and industry. In the inferior world, it is labor. In science, it is sulfur, mercury, and salt, which, volatilized and fixed alternatively, compose the Azoth of the sages. Azov is also known as Vril, the elixir of immortality, that used to be more available in the distant past when more humans had access to the underground. Another reason for high competition for the time gates. Vril is pretty much milk and honey that can only be made near the heart of the earth. The honey is liquid gold. The milk is pure liquid light, mixed together in just the right proportions. Creates this drink that rejuvenates your entire physiology. This is why gold became so valuable. Now, some may think, hang on, wasn't Vril written about as an energy source? Yes, it's both. When I visit these underground worlds, I see entire cities with rivers of gold, entire civilizations that run on Vril, which is why your gold was taken away and your currency is now fiat, leading to all the craziness we see today. Few more slides here. Deep within the earth, you have the kings of Shambhala, the Bene Elohim, or the Rigden, cognate with Reich, Dan, the Danites, or serpent kings. They are also keepers of the Kala Chakras, or time wheels. Regular Buddhists think the Kala Chakra are just teachings of the Buddha. Esoteric Buddhists, like the Green Dragon Society, know that it really means the time gates. And wrapping it back around to Islam, pretty much it's these Shambhala kings that want everyone on the surface world to become Muslim. You see, Buddhism was the old Dharma. Islam is the new Dharma. If you see how Buddhists pray these days, it's eerily similar to how Muslims pray, bowing down to that black cube, which is the earthly representation of the central processing unit of the matrix. Allah is Ahriman, and he demands that you submit Islamiyya to the program if you want Vril. More on that in another video. I really wanted to bring this full circle back to World War II. Okay, Hitler didn't escape to Antarctica, nor did he flee to Argentina. Hitler went to the past. If you study a temperature chart for the last, let's say, 20,000 years, at first you see wide variation, but generally colder temperatures. I can tell you that spike, number one, that was from the Atlanto-Draconian War, the Great War in Heaven. After the dust cleared and the losers and winners were determined, you see around 10,000 years ago, this construct, this constant maintenance of a higher temperature is shown. That was when the cube, the 4D tesseract, closed in on us, trapping everyone here, maintaining a steady state, yeah, but no one could leave. The reason why it was so critical to maintain the time gates was because Hitler and a crew, and other groups as well, tried to go back in time to before the cube closed in all around us to see if they could get out. Do you think they succeeded? Comment below and we'll discuss it on the next video. Again, I'm not promoting one group or another. It's horrible all around what's happened to all of us. I just want people to know things are a lot more complex than they seem on the surface. And reiterate again that the ultimate battle is between those trying to escape the matrix versus those trying to keep everyone in and eventually submerge us deeper into another layer. We are not letting that happen. Whoa, I know that was super packed with a ton of info. Please check the description and my website. And the next time someone tells you they're a traveling man or woman, what will you say?